welcome back to Witch Church. It's Mal, and this might be the most exciting guest we've had in a while.
Oh, stop.
My friend and my writing coach, and one of my big inspirations with witchy business stuff is here, Sarah Cook. And I'm really excited because Sarah and I are doing a class this fall together that we'll get into in a minute. But also, I kind of want to I'm thinking about like what was our origin story, because I believe you found me from an ad that I put out in the Anne Friedman newsletter sometimes. Is am I right?
100%, yes. And I don't remember the details, but that was the first spring of the pandemic. And I had had something else big and wonderful planned for my birthday in April that got canceled because of the pandemic. And so very spontaneously, I had never done this before and have never done it since. I like saw a thing in a newsletter ad and was like, "Ooh, click, I'm going to do this." And it was you. And I ended up doing a birthday tarot reading with you. And truly, and this is not an exaggeration, and I don't know if I've said this to you yet. I've definitely wanted to say this to you. Like everything that I'm doing in my life, me getting to the point where I became self-employed, me making these huge creative shifts in how I'm using my time and what my days look like, all of that can be traced back to that session with you. Truly, truly all of it. It like set off a course that has led to the way my life looks right now. So I like cherish our origin story. And I think it's just so wild that I remember you saying you didn't know if anything had come of that ad. And like my whole, like the transformation of my life top to bottom came from that ad. So it worked.
Oh my God. Yeah, you're gonna make me cry. Yeah, it was funny. So another, because I read for so many artists and writers, and one of the artists that I read for had mentioned, like, Mal, you should put a little ad about your tarot readings in this Anne Friedman newsletter. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's give it a try. And yeah, and you came through the door, which was actually the Anne Friedman newsletter has sent me a handful of special people. So I should put, maybe I should, it's time to put another ad in. I don't do it every month, but it's good.
Absolutely.
It's a good newsletter. Yeah. And then from there, Sarah, so we've done a few readings, and then also you were in my highly sensitive person summer camp.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we got to know each other really well. And then after the highly sensitive person summer camp is when I think you started to really get down and dirty with being self-employed. If that,
Absolutely. Yeah, because I was still a social worker at the time, but I was already dealing with some burnout and I think already starting to ask some bigger questions about what I was doing. And then of course the summer camp gave me this like really expansive context for just understanding some of my own needs and how I operate. So I think that, it makes a lot of sense in retrospect that that experience happened and then like by the end of the year I was quitting my job. Like that all tracks when I look back at it.
oh my God. Yeah, yeah, that was like still to this day like the most magical class I think I've ever taught. Like, not that my other classes lacked magic, but there was something about that class that really spurred a lot of transformations for everybody, I think, including me. But it was a great little cohort. I'll have to do it again, but I also have that artist teacher thing in me where I'm like, if I do it again, will it be as good? Or can I?
It was really special and it was a really special group of people.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. But now, I mean, yes, ever since you have kind of birthed into the creative, witchy, self-employed land, I have definitely been interested in working with you and collaborating with you. And um, you know, for those who are listening who may not know, Sarah is a creativity coach. And I actually just want to read your little bio here because it's really cute. Sarah Cook is a writer, poet, and creativity coach. A past social worker, she believes in turning the page for sustainable access to curiosity, ritual, and play. She publishes For the Birds, a Substack newsletter, great newsletter, and loves bugs, zines, Lenora Carrington, eating, and asking questions. Uh, to probe at you, like, because you are primarily a writer, but you don't necessarily call yourself a writing coach. Although I would call you my writing coach, but you call yourself a creativity coach. And I think that is just a really expansive way to explain what you do with people on a coaching one-to-one basis. But tell me a little bit about how you decided on that sort of creativity coach kind
Yeah.
of label.
Well, I love that question because if I'm being totally honest, I think I keep changing my mind about what I call myself because no, because honestly, even that word coach, I'm so dissatisfied with. Like, I think that what is happening in the space of working with other artists and writers or people who would never necessarily call themselves an artist or a writer, but are really desiring a like rebirthing of their own relationship with their creativity, right? There's something so dynamic and ephemeral and tangible, but also weird and magical. There's so many things happening in that space that even when I say I'm a creativity coach, I just feel like the language doesn't really capture everything that's happening in that space. And I do tend to attract a lot of writers because I'm a writer and I love working with writers and I bring a lot of reading and editing skills to that work too. But really the core of what's happening is I'm holding a really sensitive and big and trauma informed space to help people heal their relationship to their creativity. And that looks so different from one person to the next. And that can involve writing or it doesn't, or it involves, some other component of one's creativity. I mean, our creativity shows up in so many different ways. And so I think my aim is to hold a space that accommodates the other person's vision of what that looks like for them and what they'd like it to look like.
Yes. And I agree with you with the frustration on the word coach. Uh,
Yeah.
coach, it has some kind of connotation that you're telling someone what to do, or you're assigning them, like, okay, you're gonna start getting up at 5 a.m. and you're gonna start doing mere affirmations, like whatever.
Yeah.
And it's truly, yeah, it's not what you do at all. I do think you're a coach, but it's more of a space holder or a facilitator kind of thing that you're doing, where you allow this really special space for creatives and writers like me to come and not have to present you any proof that they do in fact write or create. Or I remember the first time I had a little session with you, a creativity session. It was like, I almost felt like I was like, well, I haven't written anything since college. And we just started talking about that. And we unpacked a lot about why that may be. And even that was so opening when you show up to a creativity space. Usually you're handed a prompt and they're like, all right, write 3 sentences about the word rainbow or like whatever. You have to come up with stuff. And like that's what I was prepared to do coming to with you.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that at all. And I so appreciated it because I don't know, like sometimes you just need that space to consider something or to talk through something versus the pressure to actually make something when you're creative.
Totally, totally. And the word, like the thing that's coming to my mind as you're saying that is, and it's funny that you mentioned like schooling and academia. I think for a lot of us who have any kind of wounding from being in that space, there can be this sense that we have to keep like earning or proving our creativity. And so, like, if you and I are entering a space together, I need to like prompt you to somehow show me what kind of creative person you are, or like demonstrate your chops or whatever. And yeah, that kind of like needing to earn our creativity or the value or what makes it worth it, all of that stuff I'm so interested in like purging and reframing and healing and having a relationship with our creativity that just does not depend on any of that in any way whatsoever.
Yes. And I'm kind of glad we're talking about this too, because it's kind of is like a weird segue, not a weird segue, but a good segue into our journey that begins Saturday, October 14th.
Yes.
Program that we've been in the process of creating together for, I don't know, like the idea came through probably at the beginning of 2023, and then we sat on it for a couple months. Then we started meeting about it probably in the spring. We talked about it a lot, in the summer, but let's just say that the creation of this program or this semester, called the Untethered Artist, was just a very it was a beautiful process because there was no rush. We were like, this is
Really.
exactly when it needs to be birthed. Let's experiment with what this is going to be. And what we've come up with is offering this amazing semester for creatives who sort of feel maybe a little bit, I don't know, down in the dumps or uninspired about their creative journey. Maybe they feel kind of stuck, um, not necessarily in a writer's block, because it's not just for writers, but I think that term could be applicable to our program. Um,
Sure.
no matter what modality you work with. But it's more than that. I think we were originally inspired by The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, and how she says everybody is a creative. And, I think there's something about this semester where we're really going to be holding space for everyone, I think, including us, to see our creativity in a new light and have a new relationship to our creativity.
Really.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I described the class quite, if
Beautifully.
I did it justice, I was gonna say, but yeah, tell us, Sarah, a little bit about what you feel the untethered artist is sort of offering people.
Yeah. Well, your description was beautiful, and the other thing that came to mind is, you know, even for someone who doesn't necessarily feel a block or some big wound that they've identified with their creativity, I think it's still really easy for us to just fall into a kind of disenchanted state. Like I like thinking about enchantment, the role enchantment plays in creativity, and I often think that sometimes we just need like a boost of enchantment, and we need some, this mix. To me, the untethered artist is going to be this like container that we're going to enter in a community space, in an inclusive space, and it's going to be a mix of, prompting and witnessing and sharing and a little bit of collaborating, and just those things that, you know kind of like the best, most magical components of a shared learning space, but outside of an institution and outside of, a more formal classroom space, right? So a little more magical, a little more liberating, hopefully a little more playful, more trauma informed for sure. um yeah, I just think it's going to be a really, I don't know, I just had this image of like, and I guess it's because I'm already so excited for the spooky time of year to be nearly upon us, but I just had this image of like, oh, we're all gonna like hop in this big cauldron together and like brew some things up, and we're gonna come out of it changed, and bigger and a little more in touch. I think more in touch with our creative intuition. That's a thing that's like so important to me, that I think especially for those of us who, like myself, maybe spent a lot of time in academia and learned to like, you know, be looking for proof, credentials, verification, all that stuff at the expense of our creative intuition. I really, I see this as a chance for us to tend that. And for some of us, maybe it's even just figuring out what the hell is that? Do I have intuition? Yes, you do. But like, let's hold some space for us to remember that we have that and get back in touch with that and figure out what it looks and feels like and then what we can do with that, you know?
In a lot of ways, I so agree, Sarah. And you made me think that in a lot of ways, this is a course. It's a not only a course in creativity, but it's a course in self trust.
Mm.
And academia lands, especially, I mean, we both have the writing background, so we've spent a lot of time in writers workshops, and it can be a place where self-trust feels like it gets kind of stripped from you in some way because like you said, it becomes how can I write this thing in the tone that will impress my teacher or will impress my classmates or get good feedback from the writer's workshop versus how do I trust myself to know what I'm meant to bring into this world? And is constructive criticism helpful? Of course. I think every artist also needs that. But I wonder, yeah, I wonder what kind of shadow work we'll do with that sort of unpacking in class. And when it comes to the ideal student, yeah, I think you're right. Like maybe it is the writer who's been writing for 20 years and they have writer's block. But equally, I really hope we get some people who say, I don't know, like you've heard someone say, "Oh, I've always wanted to be an artist, but I just never have." Uh,
Mhm.
really hope we get at least like two or three people who have told themselves that their entire life, like, "Oh, I wish I could be creative, but I'm just not." Or
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a hard, and that I think often has to do with that academic wounding. But yeah, the struggle to own the label or, and I in the past have struggled with this too, with writing, like, which boxes do I have to check so that I can then just call myself a writer with zero drama and trust that it's real, right? And fortunately, that's a thing that I've like I can do with a lot of ease and confidence now, but not always, right? That I had my own experience of that being really hard too. And so I have a lot of empathy for that too. But yes, if you're someone who, I'm thinking of this person who, like, let's say they want to say, well, I'm not a creative person. I'm really not that creative. But like, so often the people who say that to me, they are doing like five different creative things in all these different avenues of their lives, right? And there's clearly a part of them that's really intrigued by creativity. So yeah, I want this to be a space that is hopefully inviting people to experiment with like owning or like inching their way toward owning the aspect of their lives that is informed by their creativity, and so that they can like fold that into their daily and weekly routines and lives a little bit more so maybe than they have up until now.
yes, yeah, oh yeah, this is gonna be awesome. I'm just so excited. And one thing I'll say too as a clarifying question, I think this is something I actually asked you in the brainstorming process of us creating the class because I was concerned about this for my own self. I was like, wait, Sarah, but like, what if I don't come out of this class with my first book written? Like
Mhm.
what you told me made perfect sense. You were like, Mal, no, no, no. Like, you actually don't, we don't have a due date or an expectation that anybody is coming to this course to finish something or even evoke a new painting, a new book, a new poem. Like, there is no writing assignment or painting assignment or a thesis that you're developing. But in the process of probing the creative process and probing your inner artist, is it possible that surprise nuggets of inspiration for a new project will find you? Yeah, like is it possible that you might be surprised how much you feel like you wanna, you know, carve out an hour in the morning every Thursday to do your sketching? Yeah, like this class again, it does not have uh, uh, a an expectation, but I do think there's a big space for people to be inspired for their own creative projects if that happens.
Absolutely. Well, I think when we're doing the kind of work that is about not tending a specific project, but tending our relationship with our creativity, I think a really natural and organic result of that is as that relationship feels stronger, more stable, that leads to more play, more creative experiment, more exploration. Like it's going to lead to projects, experiments with new mediums, bigger ways of like viewing yourself as a creative person and an artist. So I think those things will be a natural result of it, but I also think it means that it's going to be a space that's really accommodating, because I think someone who has been stalled around a very specific book project for months and months and months is going to get something out of it, but so is the person who hasn't done anything creative in a really long time, and they are just tired of that being the case and they want it to be otherwise. Like both people, whether you have a clear thing or not, there's going to be, I think the kind of tending that we're wanting to do together is going to serve both and is going to lead to more just feeling like you have access to your creativity more often, you know?
Yes, that's such a good answer. And I hope we're going to have a sort of cornucopia of different, different people, and different experiences. That's going to make the class so rich. So,
Totally, totally.
thank you all for listening to our little class description. And of course, I'll leave the link to my website in the show notes if you want to read more about the class dates, and also Sarah's website and information will be down there too. So feel free to shoot us an email or a question, or if you want to, you shoot us a few voice messages on Instagram or whatever and want to talk a little bit about possibly taking the class. I'm open to that. I'm assuming, Sarah, you're open to that as well.
And I kind of want to just reiterate that because I know too, especially again, if you're someone who has been in a writing workshop or been in a classroom space or any kind of like formal space like that, that was less than satisfying, let's say, I know it can feel, really scary sometimes and it's a big deal to like put yourself into a situation where something as sensitive and personal and complex as our creativity is going to be shared and witnessed in a small group space. And if you've been in spaces where it was not tended or seen in a very authentic way, it's a big deal to like put yourself out there again. So I'm like such a huge fan of asking questions if you want to chat one-on-one or with both Mal and I, and just like really get a feel for, is this going to be the right space for you, or you have more questions and just want like more clarity about what it's going to look like. If that would help you feel safer and feel like this is the right thing for you, yeah, we are just like so welcoming and understanding of that.
Yes, amen, amen. And we do have a few scholarship sliding scale spots open too. So, and as of right now, the class has been out for about a week. We've gotten a couple signups, but no one has inquired about the scholarship sliding scale slots. So, if you have wanted to inquire about that and you really want to take this class, please reach out, and Sarah and I would love to talk more. We're doing that on more of an individual need based basis, but yeah, we do have those slots and we want to give them if anybody is wanting that accessibility. So we'll put that out there too. But yay, okay. Well, Sarah, we thought me and Sarah were both talking about a fun podcast we could do together. And I thought it would be fun if we interviewed each other a little bit. Just so it's kind of like a get to know your teacher kind of podcast. And also I think the questions that you'll be asking, they're maybe things that my listeners don't know about me because my listeners know a lot about my astrology and tarot journey, but they may not know that much about my like creative English writing journey. So I think it'll be a fun way to get to know that side of me. And of course, I want people to get to know that side of you as well, Sarah. So we'll both be answering the same questions and seeing how that goes, I guess.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, can I kick things off?
Please, please, yes.
So I really wanted to ask you this question, like in a creative capacity, what kinds of things inspire you? But before I turn that question over to you, I just want to also invite, sometimes in addition to thinking about inspiration, I really like thinking about enthusiasm. For me, even though inspiration, like etymologically, literally has to do with the body and the breath, when I think about inspiration, it can feel like this kind of daunting, big, like the muses are coming in and speaking through me kind of thing. And so sometimes it can almost risk feeling a little abstract. When I think about enthusiasm, I'm like immediately in my body. And it feels like I can, if I'm feeling if I'm feeling inspired, maybe that's a harder thing sometimes for me to notice. But if I'm feeling enthusiastic about something, it's just right there. I feel it in my gut. I feel it in my chest. And I think it can be just like a nice way to notice the things that excite us creatively. So my question for you, and maybe one word feels more accessible than the other, but just if you could talk a little bit about, in the context of your creativity, what inspires you or what you feel enthusiastic about.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I almost wish someone asked me this in college.
I do too. Yeah. I There were a lot of questions that I think we both probably should have been asked.
I will say that when I think back to my journey as a writer, and I would call writing my main modality of creativity, I was definitely most inspired when I was reading a lot of religious texts. I was also a religious studies major. And you know how one of the annoying creative writing teacher tropes is the creative writing teacher being like, if you want to be a good writer, you got to read a lot. And yeah, I understand that a little bit, but then I also am like, God damn it, they were right. Because there was a point in my like college career where um yeah, I was reading like a lot about Sufism and the sort of Christian mysticism and Jewish mysticism and pretty much any kind of mysticism I could get my hands on. I just loved it. And that's sort of what led me to doing my like one of my senior thesi I did on the poetry written by priests. So I became really, really inspired by just people who wanted to write about the universe and God. And this is so me, right? Because I'm an astrologer. And for me, like astrology is the language of the universe in a lot of ways. But really, I mean, you could even put me in a Catholic church and I could be bored out of my mind and I could flip to a page in like the Bible and I'd be like, "Oh, that's like really interesting. I kind of like want to take that word or that line or that concept and like blow it up and see what where it comes from." So maybe that's like my past life as a priest or a monk or something coming through, but that really is a big crux of my inspiration, like religious texts, spiritual mysticism, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Can I ask like a follow-up question? I'm curious about the role that mysticism plays potentially. And this, you know, I did not prep Mal with this question. So also if you need like, if you're like, whoa, this is a big question, I need time, I don't have an immediate answer, that's like always, always, always perfect and wonderful. But I found myself hearing you talk just now, really curious about the role that like mysticism and magic play in your experience of writing. So I don't mean on the page, content wise. I mean the environment in which you're sitting down and you have your tools and you're carving out a physical space to write, like your experience of being creative and of writing. How are magic and mysticism like showing up or not?
Ooh, that's a big question. And I would say I haven't I haven't experimented with that as much as I think I would like. And you're making me want to like go write in a church or something.
Ooh, I love that idea. Yeah, that's such a good idea.
Well, I will say, like, whenever I'm traveling, which is definitely my favorite thing on the planet, like, for me, where do I go? Like, what kind of sites do I like to see? Churches, the religious sites, like that for me lights me up. And a lot of the times I'll just sit in wherever I am, the church for like an hour and just be kind of chilling out and writing. And that has just been an experience I've had when I'm traveling, but I do wonder if I could somehow, quote unquote, go to church. Maybe it doesn't have to actually be that, but a physical building. But like, how do I make it into a sort of more spiritual experience? Because I will say, I don't wake up and go to my desk and sit down and feel like it's a mystical experience. I just start thinking about how many emails I have to answer.
You don't find that magical and mysterious and inspiring?
It's such a probing question there that really got my wheels turning.
I'm so glad. I feel like there's going to be some really wonderful and nourishing like experimentation this fall for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point too. Us as teachers will definitely be in like taking the class along with students, right? But Sarah, I'm so curious about the same question for you. Like, what for you keep or like I would say what does enthuse you and what does inspire you, but also what keeps you enthused?
What keeps me enthused is such a good fucking question. Do you cuss on this? I'm just suddenly trying to remember.
But you
uh,
once on every episode.
um, yeah. I mean, I think a really like easy, dependable answer for me here is like my relationship with the natural world, with being outside, with plants, with bugs, with hiking. That is a constant source of enthusiasm and inspiration for me. And maybe the other thing that's meaningful to say here too is, besides just answering this question with like a specific piece of content, there's also like a shape that I find very inspiring, which is like the shape of zooming in on something tiny. Like, I think it is literally why I love bugs. Like, part of why I love bugs, because I love zooming in on like little pieces of nature so much. I'm always like, it probably won't surprise you to hear that when I'm like hiking or walking, I'm always like picking up little leaves and twigs and things. I love like literally zooming in on things, but I also love the creative process of like taking an idea or a question and like turning it and turning it and turning it and like again and again, and zooming in so much that like even the things that seem really obvious or seem like they already have an answer, like you get close enough to the idea that there's always more. I like that experience. I Some people like my partner Mo, who's also a writer and a brilliant editor and an amazing creative person, he has this ability to like synthesize unlike I've ever seen. He can like zoom out, big picture, talk about art and movies in this way that's like I'm so envious of because I can't do that. But what I can do and what I love to do is get really, really tiny and zoomed in on the thing. And I can ask a question and never get bored asking that question again and again. And it becomes creatively, it becomes not even about finding the answer, but like what you generate in continuing to be curious about the same thing for an extended period of time. That keeps me enthused.
Ooh, yeah. Like, how can you be, yeah, how can you get excited, or what feels what feels like a question you could ask over and over again and it would give you a different answer, or slightly more interesting answer, just a different answer every time you ask it.
I think a question I've been asking for a long time, and this goes back to my experience being in the social work field, is like what does the edge of my empathy look like? Like what's happening there at the edge where I'm able to empathize with something difficult or someone who made a choice that I don't agree with, and when I reach that point where I can no longer empathize, like I'm very curious about what's happening there and what it looks like to encourage a kind of radical empathy. I feel like that's a question that I've been asking again and again and again, and I'll never have like a stable answer to, because every time, I have moments where I can feel my empathy expand a little bit, but I think it's always changing and I'm always like getting clearer and clearer on that. But I think that's a question that, and it comes up in the writing too, just this idea of like what does it look like to be as empathetic as possible, to empathize with things that feel difficult, maybe even to understand or to empathize with. And what's happening just beyond that, where I'm just like, no, not that. Like I'm very curious about that space. And again, to me, it's like in my mind, it's like this boundary. And so there's this part of me that has this creative impulse to like zoom in on that boundary, and see what's happening there and get really, really like close up to it and study it and investigate it. So, yeah, I think that's a big one for me.
Yeah. Yeah, you're reminding me of the phrase compassion fatigue. I've
Mm,
that's been thrown around a lot the past couple years, like the panini press, like therapists or teachers or doctors or whatever, the people that are supposed to be the caretakers of the society, having compassion fatigue. And
yeah.
one of the or having or yeah compassion, or yeah, compassion fatigue. And recently my an acupuncturist that I work with sort of gave me this interesting musing where she said, no, compassion, you can't get tired from having compassion, um
Mm,
because like compassion is offering, is being in that place of like unconditional love, or sort of a place that we're in the frequency of the same type of love that spirit or the universe would offer us. And you can't get tired in that space, but you can get tired in like the place of sympathy. And I think sometimes we can even get tired in the place of empathy, depending on like where we are with it. And she was saying something about how sympathy is actually a judgment, because when you're like, oh, I sympathize with them so much, I feel so bad for them, you're extending them pity and thus a judgment. And that's what eventually exhausts us. Where,
ah,
whereas compassion is a place of, there's no judgment at all. There's no extension of anything. There's no extension of the self. It's an extension of the what is unlimited or infinite, and that is like love, but love in a higher place. But I don't know. I just wanted to say that I don't know something about what
Oh,
you were saying like that.
yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. Pity. That's a complicated one too. That's not a very useful thing in my in my experience. But yeah, no, I love that. I love that.
Uh, well, I also want to ask you, Sarah. So we were kind of looking at in our creation of questions we wanted to ask each other. There's that article on in the New York Times. It's the Modern Love articles, and that article is called The 36 Questions That Lead to Love. One of the questions that intrigued me was uh, what do you consider to be your greatest accomplishment? And
Yeah.
I want to ask that because I think there is a very sort of, I don't know, like capitalistic way to answer that. And then there's a way that you're going to answer it, which has nothing to do with that. So I just wanted to hear how you're going to answer it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this so much. And you know me very well. And yeah, accomplishment is such a funny word. Yeah. And I have this immediate impression of like where my brain is supposed to go in order to talk about my accomplishments, which are, things that are gonna, have to do with money or like status or prestige or something. Um and the first thing that comes to my mind though is like a genuine and authentic answer to that question has something to do with becoming self-employed, but not for the reason that you might think, which is like I'm my own boss now and I'm whatever. Like when I made the choice to stop being a social worker, which was, in a big way driven by burnout, not compassion fatigue, burnout from the system and the agency, two very different things. Um, and I became self-employed, it happened in this very organic way, but in a way that was also like I was in a little bit of denial with myself about what I was doing. I was not just like, I'm becoming a coach and I'm doing this thing. I had to kind of like almost trick myself into doing it. And so I wasn't even fully clear on what I was aiming to do or why I was doing it. There was a little bit of intuition, a little bit of just kind of things happening on other like subconscious levels. And what I realize now, and really I've only just realized in the past maybe 6 months, like this is a very new realization. I needed to become self-employed in order to heal my relationship to my creative authority. Like I now, I mean, in addition to serving other writers, other creative folks, doing work that I care about deeply, holding spaces for people that I think are so important to hold, I'm also benefiting from this new strange life that I have because it's finally given me access to something that I could not access in academia, that I had never accessed before in a job, which is self trust and this sense of like, oh, I have, in the healthiest and most generous way possible, I have a kind of creative authority that is valuable and that can help other people and that can put good things into the world. And I would have never been able to step into this fully without becoming self-employed. I didn't know that's why I was becoming self-employed. I wasn't like I'm going to finally own my creative authority, but it's this thing that now I'm like, oh, of course this is like what the journey that I've been on. And so that that ability to like to put myself in a situation almost intuitively because it was going to give me access to a kind of healing that I like desperately needed. I feel like that's my biggest accomplishment. Like that's the thing that I'm just like when I really think about it in this moment of articulating it, I actually feel like gratitude for myself, which is such a nice thing to access. That's a hard thing to access, but it feels like, wow, yeah, making this kind of like shift in my life has been a huge accomplishment.
Totally. I see that in you. And it also reminds me too that um you have a very like literal uh
Mm.
thing going on too with the healing your relationship with like what was the phrase with not creativity but autonomous creativity
Creative authority.
of authority. You also changed your name.
Yeah, I also changed. P.S. No big deal. Yeah, I also changed my name.
That feels like a thing too. Like and that all came together like it was like these puzzle pieces that were just magically floating together in a lot of ways.
Yeah, which also, I mean, my website is just it's my name, Sarah Teresa Cook, and but when I registered my business, my name, my like new last name, Cook, is part of my business too. So that's also I'm also just reflecting on that kind of for the first time in this moment too, that like not only did I legally change my name, but then that new name became my legal business name too. Like it's all been so built into each other. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. It's yeah, it all feels very serendipitous.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are on this big thing called accomplishment.
Yeah, and I have a complicated relationship with the word accomplishment, and the for me, you know, I can't tell you how many moments in my younger 20s where I was pining after what I thought was an accomplishment. So like the graduation of college with honors and like getting the grant to go teach in Malaysia and teaching in Malaysia for a year. And it's funny that um in having the uh this big accomplishment of graduating with honors and receiving this grant, once I got to Malaysia, it was the most humbling thing ever because no one cared. Like no, to my students, I was just this fun camp counselor that just popped into their school one day. They didn't give a shit that I wrote a thesis about priests and poets and have a double major. And that's when my relationship to accomplishment really started to change. It was because I was like, oh, like there was an ego death in that. I was like, literally, no one cares. No, no one cares about your double major. But it was like, it was like I was like, no, yeah, like truly, it was humbling. It was good for me. That same year, I got my first tarot deck. You know, so it is interesting that that humbling came through, and then also my first tarot deck comes through. You know, a little soon after that. Now, when it comes to actually answering the question, you know, because that's when my relationship to accomplishment started to change. Um, I think accomplishment is it's more about for me uh it kind of takes me back to our highly sensitive person class because I view that as a really big accomplishment, not just for me but in um what I helped facilitate, which was a group of people who felt safe enough to not only be vulnerable with each other but be vulnerable with themselves. And that was huge. And I think that's my greatest accomplishment, like not just specifically that class, but if I can create a space for people to know themselves in a deeper way. It's not me telling them who they are. Like they're feeling comfortable to face themselves in the sort of hug that I'm giving them. Like that's that's the best. And I think through doing that too, it becomes impossible not to face your own self, right? And that also brings me to another accomplishment, which is just like living as a queer person and being like fuck yeah, like I'm queer and I love it. And God, it would like suck so hard to be straight. I'm so sorry. Like people, like I can't believe I've spent like so much of my life like just fingers crossed that there's some boy that I'm gonna really like someday. Like like I think that's also a huge accomplishment too, that I only got to because yeah, because when you help other people do that, then you also are faced with that same duty, if that makes sense, Sarah.
Yeah, and like what I love about your share too is like there is necessarily so many phases of this like healing journey that are serious and heavy, and where there's like necessary grief and anger. Those things often go hand in hand, and processing and all of that. But there's also this other thing that I really hear you saying, which is like the like unbridled affection and adoration that we also can like achieve with ourselves and our circumstances, and that there's also such joy and playfulness in healing too. Like, and I think that maybe feels like an important thing to name, because I think all of these things, I think writing and creativity and healing and trauma, like there are ways that all of these things intersect, right? It's almost like they live in our body in the same places and like move through our body in similar ways. And so, yes, there can be a lot of difficulty in that, but there's also a lot of like play and creating ourselves anew, and having all this like wonderful affection where you're just like, thank God I'm not straight. Like like it's so beautiful and amazing, right? So I like to just, yeah, I love the real like joy of what you're sharing. That feels so important to like highlight.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. I love it for that reflection. uh cool. Next question. uh
Yeah, next question. Let's see.
what do we want to Oh, wait, this is a good one. I actually want to ask you, Sarah. I don't know why this, maybe this is like a creative writing major, highly sensitive person story, but I wanted to ask you, can you tell us a story about a time when you cried in public or in front of a group? And what was that like, and how do you feel about it looking back?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. And I'm just going to answer it, I guess, with the first thing that comes to mind. And I'm sure I've cried in front of people more recently than this, but for some reason, when I first read that question, I just had this image of me. I don't, what year would this have been? Like, I was still in college. I was working like, three part-time jobs. I was still waitressing. It was like, early 20s, like that part of my life. And I was working at the Mongolian barbecue. And I just remember it was like such a, I don't know, there's a lot of drama when you're waiting tables, and nobody wants to be working at the Mongolian barbecue in my experience. Like, we're just there because we need the money and we need the tips and whatever. And I just remember something happening where there was something like had gone wrong. I don't even remember the details, but something got like pinned on me that I had not done. And I remember the owner showing up at the end of my shift and like setting me down at one of our booths to like, and I could hear him winding up to like fire me. And I just like became uncontrollable and just was sobbing. And I remember feeling so embarrassed because like the cooks, who were all men, were just standing there watching. And I'm just like this little girl, all of a sudden, just like sobbing and trying to explain and feeling so like, this thing was getting pinned on me that hadn't actually happened. And it just felt like, oh my God, my life is going to be over because people are saying I did something and I didn't do it. And I don't know how it happened. And I don't know. I don't have any like big insightful thing to say about this, but I mostly just think about that time in my life and how young I was and how long ago that was and how grateful I am to not be waiting tables anymore, because I just for the longest time it was like all I did, and it was just very necessary and got me through some periods of time, and I'm just like never ever ever want to do it ever again. It was so hard. And I just really remember like sobbing. Like it was just, yeah,
Right?
that's my answer.
Amen. Yeah. And God bless the service industry. And
Oh my God.
one of the reasons I thought of that question is because when I think back about the times when I've cried in public, like they felt like the end of the world or they felt really shameful. But
Mhm.
as they're like I kind of see it as um well I feel like I see people cry a lot, not just my individual sessions, although like I tell all my clients, this is a tear welcome zone. You never have to apologize for crying in a session. But like, I mean, in everyday life, like, just I was checking in someone at the acupuncture clinic the other day and she burst into tears, or I think of just adults losing it in because we all have bad days, and it makes me look back at the times like you're saying, like when you're young and you're like in college and you do lose it and you feel so embarrassed, but then you get older, you're like, wait, everybody's losing it. Like,
And also, PS, why are we not crying all the time? Like I should be crying 50% of the time I have to go to Fred Meyer. I don't know why I'm not. I'm just like I just have so many walls that are up. And I really think crying is like a gift. And I kind of like, I mean, this is like a weird thing to say, but there's always like a little bit of permission when someone cries in front of you. It's like this like reminder of our humanity. It kind of makes me feel inspired to want to like let myself cry in front of people more often, if I'm being totally honest, because I don't know, there's like a potency to it. Not that I want people to be crying, but like real talk, we should all probably be crying more often than we are. Like,
no,
none of us are probably doing it enough.
and as someone who, floats around on the neurodiverse scale, for me, crying means someone is unmasking in front of me in some way. And that's powerful because that gives me permission to also unmask.
Yeah,
You know what? Yeah, this is really fucked up. Like, or whatever.
totally, totally. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What what about you didn't share a specific instance of you crying?
And I'm trying to think which one because I'm like, there's so many options. There truly is so many options. Yeah, maybe I'll share the one I'm still kind of embarrassed about. But I will. When I was a sophomore in college, I was in a poetry writing workshop, and we were sharing. I was reading poems out loud, and you know how sophomore year of college is like the worst time of your life. Like it's
Well, yes, I know what you mean. Yes.
sophomores in college who happen to be listening, like it is the worst. So it'll It's up from there. But I was like going through like a horrible heartbreak, which by the way, like in speaking to my queerness, it took me a really long time to realize that like this heartbreak and this loss of this love that I thought I had with this guy was actually just like extreme attachment trauma that was triggered by this breakup. And it wasn't actually necessarily me having feelings for this person in like a romantic way. It was more, it was actually the first time that someone in a romantic, quote unquote, romantic context had like really pushed that deep attachment wound that I had from my parents, right? Because that will happen in college, right? You get into a relationship and your first few relationships often do push those buttons, right? So, it was a heartbreak kind of semester. And in an embarrassing way, I had written a poem about about my heartbreak. I don't think it was anything that bad, but like it was just the sense that, and I remember reading it in class because I had to. It was the poem that I had brought to workshop, and I cracked and I totally started crying while I was reading it. And I just felt kind of mortified. And I don't exactly remember what my professor said. He was a really nice guy, so I'm sure he actually handled it really well. But I remember just being torn up about that. And now that I look back, I don't think I should have been as embarrassed as I was, but we always are embarrassed in the moment.
Yeah, and those things are easier. I think it's easy to also assume embarrassment when we're in a like traditional classroom space. I don't think that's like a wild thing for you to be afraid of, right? Like, but
Yes. I hope
yeah.
hope that our classroom space can be a non embarrassment crying zone if anybody wants to. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that tender.
Thanks for listening. Yeah, what should we ask maybe one or two more?
Yeah, I want to ask kind of a creative question in that like the question itself is going to be creative. You giving me an answer is like a sort of a creative invitation. And so that means also that there's like no wrong way to answer the question, right? We're just sort of like playing and experimenting. So I'm curious if you think about your creativity and maybe it like feels helpful or supportive to just like close your eyes, no pressure, but thinking about like this idea that you have this like creative well inside of you, right? This like inner creative channel. And you might just kind of notice if you feel it in this moment in your body in a certain place, feel it showing up in a certain way. But I want to ask you to ask that part of you, so this creative channel that's inside of you, what is like an affirmation or a piece of reassurance that it would really like to hear?
The phrase I got, as I say it out loud, it feels very anticlimactic, but
Mm,
but it didn't feel quite so anticlimactic in my head. But the um the phrase was you're okay,
mm, you're okay.
which I feel like that might be speaking to maybe there are some parts of me that my inner creative feels not okay at all, like this sort of have I lost it completely, or will I will I ever write the book that I want to write, or will I ever be where I was in college when I was at my peak? I almost feel like a college athlete. I'm like, will I ever, you know, run like I did when I was 21? It's like, but I just really heard strongly, like, you're okay. And not in a way that felt insensitive, but more in that mothering way, like this sort of, you're
Yeah,
good, you're good.
yeah.
Sick.
I heard that immediate. Yeah, I know what you mean. I heard that motheringness immediately when you said it. And I know what you mean about the anticlimacticness, and this is where, like, even though I'm a writer, it's like language is always failing us, right? We're using words to try to communicate something that's so much bigger than words. And so I in that phrase, you're okay, I hear what it's pointing at, which is this kind of enoughness, this like radical acceptance, and like, yes, you are okay. Like, I see you and you're good and you're okay. Like, don't underestimate the power of just like reassuring yourself or some part of you that you are okay. That I think that's like, that felt very climactic to me to hear you say that out loud. And I think that's so lovely that you noticed that and then could offer that to yourself. um and the one other thing I really feel called to say in this moment is, I think it's funny, the metaphor of like the being a college athlete and like hitting your peak or your stride or whatever. I mean, I think one of the coolest things about creativity is we get to have many peaks and many evolutions, and like, undoubtedly, you know, my peak and your peak right now are different than when we were in college, but there's not, I don't think there's any value in looking at those through like a hierarchical scale. It's, we're like in a different place now, and our creativity looks different, and our we have different gifts and different skills and different enthusiasms and things that change. And so we get to sort of like rediscover that again and again. And it can be scary that it changes, right? Change can be scary or disorienting, but I think ultimately there's a lot of self-empowerment in that too, you know. So I'm like cheering you on and excited for you to discover like your current peak, you know.
Oh, yeah, that spoke to me. And you almost remind me too, like every, what is it, like 6 or 7 years, like your body completely has generated its cells into new
Yeah.
cells. You're like literally a different bag of, different meat sack that
Yeah, a
that
100%.
you just made me realize that in a weird way though. I was like, oh my God, like why do I keep for me, when I'm like, it's time to be creative, I just go straight back to college Mal. And I'm like, what? Like, I've had so many cool experiences post that. Like, we could get a whole new identity in here. So yeah, maybe there is something there with like letting go of the past self, as we say, and the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, and maybe becoming aware too. I mean, I think there's some of that too. I think sometimes when my like inner critic is the most active, I can like pinpoint it down to a very specific professor from college, and it's like, "Oh, I think that's actually his voice in my head, not even my inner critic. It's like somebody else dressed up as my inner critic pretending to be me." So, I think, that kind of work of becoming aware of like the sources of those things, and then being able to do the work of deciding, okay, that's stuck in there because that was clearly this like pivotal moment in my life where external validation was like, the most amped up. And so how can I shift what my sources are of validation and like reclaim some of that internally, and also, find validation in the experience of gathering in community, where it's not about impressing one person who has all the power in the room, but it's like, oh, being witnessed in a group, this is validation too, right? Like finding other definitions for those things,
100%. Yeah. 100%. And you rather be comfortable in a group of weirdos and be able to read your stuff there than with anybody else anyways. So
Totally. Totally.
I think a meditative prompt just came to mind
Hmm.
to give to you if you're open.
Ooh, I'm open, yes.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll just invite you to yeah, just yeah, maybe you also can sink into your body for a moment and maybe just bringing some intention to the breath. And on your next inhale, I'll invite you to just inhale a color that feels healing to you in this moment. It's any color that comes to mind first. There's no wrong answer. Just trusting in whatever shade comes through your imagination. And as you inhale that color, I want you to notice without judgment where that color starts to travel in your body. Maybe it shoots down straight to your big toe, or it pings right to the top of your head, or it fills your heart space. Again, there's no wrong answer. And just kind of collecting data from that. And on your next exhale, I'll invite you to just let out a big puff of that color. And if you feel called, I would love to know, you know, with that color and maybe your experience with where that color maybe traveled to in your body. Um, I don't know, does it inform anything about your creative process right now, or does it tell you anything about what you may need in this moment? Of course, this is only a question a highly sensitive person could answer, but yeah, I want to know, yeah, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, that was wild. So I really was surprised that the color was red right away. Um, right away. And like I felt it like drape over my shoulders, which is a place where strong Taurus placements, right? I have a lot of like neck and shoulder stuff and can feel a lot of blockage here and also can just carry a lot of tension in my shoulders. This was yeah, it like draped, almost like I was suddenly wearing armor or something. And then I just had this memory of having a Nickelodeon phone when I was a kid that I loved more than anything. Do you I don't know if you remember, hopefully somebody watching this is like, "Oh my God, I remember that phone. It was like purple and you could change the ringtone so that it would be like a cow or someone burping." It's like the wildest phone. I wonder if I could like find it on eBay. And I just loved it so much, and somehow that and this color and this feeling, I just had this like felt sensation of like, I think of myself like modern day Sarah as like very sensitive, very tender, all those things. But I had this real strong feeling of like, oh, I was really bold when I was a kid. And like, and it wasn't bad. And there was no self-consciousness. There was just a kind of like, before I learned to fawn or something, there was just a kind of like a boldness that was just like non-judgmentally, like this is just me. And I really have this feeling of like, oh, I think that's what I'm still trying to like return to.
Ooh,
Create. Yeah.
That's so juicy. And I kind of it's so funny. The King of Swords is sitting here and he kind of has a red cloak on there, but it does remind me like in like a king's coronation ceremony, there is some sort of sacred fabric that is usually red or purple or some really rich color that's draped over them, as well as the crowning of the crown or the sort of swordsing of the sword or you know. So I feel like it was such a sovereign, like
Mhm.
Europe to you, that boldness, like you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah, that feels like it'll be a guiding star for my own experience in this semester that we have coming up.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Well, Sarah, it's been so fun. I just love the format of the questions that we did. And I was wondering, this is me throwing in a surprise at the end for you, but you did just send a newsletter yesterday with a Monday poem. And would you be willing to do a spur of the moment live reading of the poem to kind of wrap up our episode today?
Absolutely. Let me pull that up. I love this surprise. Yeah.
Sarah's linked below. But
Yeah. I've been so just for a little bit of context, I've been just experimenting. I've had on my mind a lot lately, the role that sound plays in my relationship to creativity in a way that I'm not even sure I can fully articulate in this moment, but just that it's something that I'm aware of and have been thinking about listening as a kind of creative process as well. And so I do sometimes in my newsletter have this like recurring segment called Poems That Listen. And so this is from that. So this is called The Bird Says. Everything outside me is everything inside me too sometimes. The bird says, put the table where the chair is and the chair anywhere else. The bird says he, she, they don't have dinner plans anyway. The bird doesn't have to say anything in the first place. The bird says sand and sky and sand and sky and sand above me too, in fact. The bird says, my eyes are almost always looking elsewhere. The bird says, this emerald tree house. The bird says, this emerald tree is a house for many. The bird says, musical notes, but doesn't name them as such. The bird says, no, really, this emerald tree house, I'm not messing around. The bird says, come live with us, why don't ya? The bird says, mother, but like mother, 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 mother. The bird leaves, and all the singing happens elsewhere. The bird will never be what you think it is. That's their medicine. The bird says, nothing to see here, which is saying a lot.
just picking up on my snap. Ah,
uh,
thanks, Sarah.
thank
That
you
was,
for that invitation.
I love it. I love it. That was awesome. And I also I love sound. I love rhyme. It's the best part of poetry. So that and thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
to this episode. And yeah, my friends, everything's in the show notes that you need. And thanks so much for coming to this Witch Church special this week. And yeah, me and Sarah will hopefully see you in class. And if not, still say hi at on Instagram or at Witch Church. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys there.
Beautiful. Yeah. See you soon.
Sarah.
Bye.